Rain slapped hard against the windshield of the black, unmarked cruiser as it pulled up to the curb in front of the brick brownstone on East 94th Street. Officer Brenner killed the engine, then glanced sideways at his partner, Morales. Tension coiled in his jaw. "Dispatch says she's resisting," Morales muttered, loading his body cam. "Some kind of obstruction charge." Brenner tightened his grip on the door handle. "Let's just get her in and out, no games." They moved up the stoop fast, boots heavy on the slick concrete. The front door was already ajar, lights inside flickering like someone had been pacing too long without sleep. Brenner knocked once hard. A voice called from inside. "I told you already, if there's a warrant, show it to me." The door opened fully. A woman stood there, tall, composed, wearing a navy blazer over a pale gray tee. Her expression was sharp but calm, the kind of calm that made Morales hesitate. Brenner didn't. "Ma'am, you're being placed under arrest for obstruction of justice." "On what grounds?" she asked, not moving. Morales fumbled slightly, unsure. Brenner stepped forward. "Turn around. I asked a legal question. You need to answer before putting hands on me." That did it. Brenner grabbed her arm. She didn't fight back, but her voice stayed firm. "You're making a serious mistake." "Yeah," he muttered. "That's what they all say." The cuffs snapped around her wrists. Morales looked pale. "Jesus, Brenner," he whispered. "Did you even look at her ID?" But it was too late. The woman turned her head slightly. "I'm Judge Elise Grant," she said evenly. "Federal District Court. You just detained a sitting judge without a valid warrant, and you haven't even asked for identification." The silence dropped like a gavel in a courtroom. Morales froze. "Wait, what?" Brenner laughed awkwardly, not buying it. "You expect me to believe that?" Elise didn't flinch. "My ID is in my left pocket. Take it out carefully, unless you want obstruction charges of your own." Morales reached for it slowly. One look, and he went white. He held it up for Brenner to see. "Elise M. Grant, U.S. District Judge." Jesus Christ! Brenner swallowed hard, panic now dawning behind his eyes. Elise stared straight ahead, unblinking. "I asked you," she said softly. "On what grounds?" Outside, the rain kept falling, smearing red and blue light across the slick pavement as the cruiser lights continued to flash. Inside, no one moved. And then, just beneath her breath, Elise added, "You didn't ask who I was." You didn't care, and that's exactly the problem. Neither of the officers spoke. They had no idea who she was. They had no idea who she was related to, but that was about to change. Very, very fast. Back at the precinct, the mood had soured. Lieutenant Darnell leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable, while Officer Morales stood like a schoolboy caught with a broken window. Brenner paced the floor, sweat collecting at the collar of his uniform. "You arrested a federal judge," Darnell said slowly, deliberately, "with no warrant, no backup, no probable cause." Brenner clenched his fists. "She was interfering with an active investigation, refused to comply." "She asked you for a warrant," Morales muttered, barely above a whisper. "We didn't have one." Darnell turned his eyes to Morales. "And you cuffed her anyway." Morales said nothing. There was a long pause before Darnell slid a file across the desk. "Do you know who Judge Grant is?" Neither man answered. Darnell tapped the name at the top. "She's not just any federal judge. She's Elise Margaret Grant, Harvard Law, 20 years on the bench, and the first cousin of Dr. Jordan Peterson." Brenner's eyebrows lifted. "The psychologist? The YouTube guy?" Darnell's voice was a whisper now. "The best-selling author, world-touring lecturer, advisor to policymakers, that Jordan Peterson." Brenner scoffed, trying to downplay it. "So what? It's not like he runs the government." Darnell's stare cut through him. "He doesn't have to. His influence alone is enough to wreck you." Silence again. Darnell leaned forward. "You know how many political allies that man has? How many podcasts, channels, universities that hang on his every word? You think this won't explode?" Brenner opened his mouth, closed it, then finally muttered, "We didn't know." "You didn't ask," Darnell snapped. "She tried to tell you. She was calm, respectful, and you treated her like a suspect because you assumed." Morales shifted uncomfortably. "Where is she now?" Darnell asked. "In interview room 2, Morales said. "She wouldn't say anything else. Get her out, quietly. No charges, no record, not one word more than necessary." Brenner hesitated. "She said she's filing a formal complaint." "She will," Darnell said, rubbing his temple. "And when she does, every mistake you've ever made will be re-examined with a microscope." Morales stepped toward the door, but Darnell raised a hand. "Wait, let me talk to her." Down the hallway, Elise sat perfectly straight in a cold metal chair. Her hands rested in front of her, fingers interlaced, eyes watching the blank wall across from her. When Darnell entered, she didn't even blink. "Judge Grant," he said softly. She slowly turned her head. "I'd like to offer a sincere apology on behalf of the department." "I'm not here for apologies," she replied. "I want accountability. You'll get it, and we're asking for discretion. Please understand, this wasn't about who you are." "That's exactly the point," she said. "It never is, until it is." She rose slowly. "Tell Officer Brenner to look me in the eye next time he presumes guilt, because next time I won't walk out quietly." She didn't wait for an answer, and as she stepped into the hallway, her voice echoed down the corridor. "Call Jordan. He'll want to know." The phone vibrated on the polished wood desk just as Jordan Peterson finished a Zoom lecture on psychological resilience. He glanced at the screen. Elise Grant. He rarely got calls from her unless something was wrong. He answered immediately. "Elise." Her voice was clipped, controlled, but he could hear the pressure beneath it. "I was arrested yesterday." Jordan froze. "What? In New York? 2 officers? No warrant, no questions, just cuffs. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. But they weren't. He stood slowly, one hand gripping the edge of the desk. "Tell me everything." She laid it out plainly. No dramatics, no extra color, just facts. She'd been reviewing sealed case files from a controversial narcotics case when the officers showed up, claiming she was obstructing. They never checked her credentials, never asked why she was there. "They cuffed me like I was trash," she said. "Didn't even blink." Jordan listened without interrupting. "I told them who I was," she continued, "and when they found out, they nearly fell apart." He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Do you want this public?" "I want this accountable." Silence stretched for a moment. "Elise," he said gently, "you know what will happen if I speak about this." "I do. They'll call it political, accuse you of using me for influence. I don't care what they call it. This is bigger than us." He nodded to himself, walking slowly across the room. "Send me every detail, names, badge numbers. I'll handle it with care." Her voice softened. "I knew you would." Before hanging up, Jordan added, "This isn't just about an arrest. This is about how we treat people when we don't know who they are. And if they can do this to you, they've done worse to others." By evening, the story had already begun leaking. A Twitter thread appeared from a local journalist with credible sources inside the NYPD. It outlined a high-profile mistaken arrest involving a federal judge. No names yet, but it was gaining traction. Jordan scrolled through quietly, then opened his camera. He sat in his signature tweed jacket, soft lighting in the background, and pressed record. "There's a story I think you need to hear," he began, voice low and deliberate. "Not because it involves me or my family, but because it reveals something critical about how we operate, how we assume, how we fail to ask questions, and how we treat strangers as threats." He paused, then added, "A federal judge was handcuffed by police with no cause. That judge happens to be my cousin, but she could have been anyone." Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Hashtags exploded. Podcasts picked it up. And inside the 11th precinct, Officer Brenner's name started showing up on screens far outside of New York. The story wasn't just out, it was on fire. The morning after Jordan's video dropped, the NYPD's press office was in full panic mode. Phones rang non-stop. Screens displayed headlines like, "Judge illegally detained, NYPD under fire," and Jordan Peterson demands accountability for cousin's arrest. At the 11th precinct, Lieutenant Darnell stood before a sea of restless officers, his voice tight. "This is now a crisis. We are coordinating with legal, PR, and the commissioner's office. No one speaks to the press." "Understood?" Brenner sat stiff in the back, jaw locked. Morales looked like he hadn't slept. A young officer leaned toward Brenner. "They're saying you knew who she was and did it anyway." Brenner shot him a glare. "I didn't know. I didn't even think." "Exactly the problem," Morales muttered under his breath. Brenner ignored him. At City Hall, Chief Legal Counsel Marla Haynes briefed Mayor Grover behind closed doors. A copy of Judge Elise Grant's CV lay open on the desk. "She's not pressing charges. Yet," Marla said. "But she's filed a formal complaint. DOJ's Civil Rights Division is already sniffing around." Mayor Grover sighed. "And Peterson? He hasn't named the officers. But it's clear he will if things escalate. We need to get ahead of this, not without looking like we're trying to cover it up." He looked out the window. "What's the play?" "Transparency," she said. "Apology. Suspension pending investigation. And maybe, just maybe, you ask her to speak publicly. To defend us? To explain how this shouldn't happen to anyone, not even a judge." Meanwhile, Elise stood before her packed courtroom. Her hands rested on the bench, her voice steady. "We proceed today as we always do, in service of the law and in protection of the rights of every citizen who enters this room." A defense attorney stood. "Permission to inquire, Your Honor, regarding the news reports." She cut him off with a look. "We will not be discussing personal matters in this courtroom. Justice here is not about me, it's about the people before us." But after the hearing, in her chambers, she wasn't as composed. Jordan's voice came through her laptop. "They want you to speak." "I know. You don't have to. I might need to." "Elise," he said, "you're not a symbol. You're a human being. You don't owe them a photo op to cover their shame." "I'm not doing it for them." "Then who?" She hesitated. "For the ones who don't get to walk away like I did. For the girl who gets pulled over and never makes it home. For the boy cuffed on his way to class." Jordan exhaled. "Then I'll stand with you." She looked up, voice quiet. "I know." The podium was plain, set just outside City Hall. A wall of microphones stood ready, each bearing the logo of a different network: CNN, Fox, MSNBC, The Daily Wire. Cameras buzzed. The air was thick with anticipation. Judge Elise Grant stood behind the curtain, waiting for her cue. Mayor Grover paced behind her, flanked by Chief Marla Haynes and Police Commissioner Alvarez. "You don't have to do this," he told Elise. "I do," she replied, smoothing the front of her blazer. "But I'll speak my truth, not your script." He hesitated, then gave a resigned nod. The aide signaled. She stepped out alone. Flashbulbs fired. Reporters yelled questions over one another. Elise raised a hand and silence fell, slow but certain. "I'm here today not to speak about myself, but about a moment that reflects a broader truth," she began, voice calm but resonant. "Last week I was detained by police officers who did not know who I was. They didn't ask. They didn't check." She paused. "I was fortunate because I'm a judge. Because I had someone powerful to call. Because a video went viral." She looked directly into the camera. "But what happens to those who don't have any of that?" The crowd went quiet. "I'm not seeking vengeance. I don't want fame. But I do demand reflection and reform, not just for me. For everyone who has ever been treated as a threat before being seen as a person." One reporter called out, "Are you saying the officers should be fired?" "I'm saying this is not about two officers," she replied. "This is about a system that trains them to expect the worst instead of seeing the whole human." Another asked, "Did your cousin Jordan Peterson push you to do this?" "No," she said without hesitation. "He supported me. But this voice, these words, they are mine." In a cafe nearby, Brenner sat watching the live stream on his phone. No badge, no uniform, just a baseball cap pulled low. Morales sat beside him. "She didn't name us," Brenner said. She didn't have to, Morales replied. Brenner nodded, quiet for a long time. We failed her. Morales didn't answer. But more than that, Brenner continued, eyes fixed on the screen. We failed who she could have been. Later that night, Elise sat alone in her apartment. No press, no cameras. Just the soft hum of city traffic outside and the weight of the day behind her. Her phone buzzed. Jordan. The message was simple. You spoke with strength and grace. Proud to be your cousin. She smiled faintly. Outside, protesters had begun to gather, peacefully. Not for her, but because of her. Signs read, "Ask first, dignity before discipline, justice for all." The conversation had begun. And it wasn't going to end quietly. 2 weeks had passed. The precinct halls weren't buzzing like before. The usual noise, laughter, hallway banter, was gone. Something quieter had taken hold, the kind of silence that comes after a storm you can't ignore. Brenner sat in the internal affairs interview room, alone with a recorder and a single overhead light. Across from him, a female investigator flipped through his personnel file. "You've been with the department 12 years, she said. "No prior disciplinary record." Brenner nodded, stiff. "Tell me, Officer Brenner, why didn't you ask her name?" He looked down, rubbing his thumb over a crease in his jeans. "I assumed," he said. She didn't answer the door like someone who was scared. She didn't look rattled, she sounded confident. "So confidence made you suspicious?" His jaw twitched. "I thought she was covering for someone. I thought she was playing smart." The investigator closed the file. "What did it feel like when you realized who she was?" He stared at her. "Like I'd failed a test I didn't even know I was taking." Across town, Elise walked into a small community legal clinic. No press this time, no city officials, just a cluster of metal chairs, a whiteboard with marker stains, and a dozen eyes watching her. The group was made up of public defenders, community organizers, and formerly incarcerated women. The organizer, a woman named Raina, introduced her without fanfare. "This is Judge Elise Grant. She's here to listen." Elise nodded and sat. The room stayed quiet for a moment, until a young woman with cornrows and wary eyes spoke first. "You really got arrested?" "Yes," Elise answered. "Bet they didn't rough you up." Elise didn't blink. "No, they didn't. But I've seen the reports." "I've read the testimonies, I believe you." Another woman added, "You got lucky. Most of us don't get a cousin with 1 million followers and a clean camera shot." "I know," Elise said. "That's why I'm here." Raina leaned forward. "Then tell us something, Judge. What changes when someone like you gets cuffed?" Elise took a breath. "People stop calling it a misunderstanding and start calling it what it really is, a systemic failure." That night, Jordan uploaded another video, but this one was different. No jacket, no set, just him at a desk, worn and candid. "My cousin is brave," he said. "Not because of who she is, but because she's using what happened to open a door for people whose names we'll never hear." He looked down, voice softer. "We talk so much about responsibility, but responsibility starts with facing the mirror. The mirror of our own assumptions, our own silence." He looked directly at the lens. "This isn't about hating police. It's about demanding better from every system meant to protect us, including our own minds." Back at the precinct, Morales stood in the locker room, staring at the mirror. He didn't see a villain, but he didn't see a hero either. He saw a man who stood still while someone else was wronged, and now he had to decide who he'd be next time. 3 months later, the NYPD released a public statement following the conclusion of their internal investigation. It was careful, tightly worded, and bureaucratically dense, but the key words stood out. Violation of protocol. Bias awareness training mandated. Disciplinary measures administered internally. No names, no admissions, no mention of Elise. But the world hadn't forgotten. At a small university lecture hall in Washington, D.C., Elise stood behind a modest podium. The room was filled with law students, professors, and community leaders. A banner behind her read, "Justice begins with presence." "This is not about humiliation," she told the crowd. It's about humility. She walked slowly across the stage. I don't think those officers woke up that morning hoping to do harm, but I do think they stopped seeing people as people. And once you lose that, everything else crumbles. A student raised her hand. Do you think things will really change? Elise didn't answer right away. I think change is slow, she said finally. But moments like this, they crack the walls. And once there's a crack, the light gets in. Elsewhere, Officer Brenner sat at a desk in a required city workshop, recognizing bias and rebuilding trust. A younger instructor led the session, pausing the screen on a freeze frame of Elise's press conference. Anyone recognize her? The instructor asked. Most nodded. She's not the exception, he said. She's the reminder. Brenner said nothing, but he wrote something down on his notepad. Ask before assuming, always. At a small dinner in Toronto, Jordan Peterson toasted with a glass of water instead of wine. To Elise, he said to the friends gathered around the table, for turning a moment of personal injustice into a movement of collective reflection. She gave him a look. I didn't lead a movement, he smiled. You didn't need to. You told the truth. The world moved on its own. In New York, a mural appeared on the side of a bodega near East 94th Street. It wasn't grand or loud, just a painting of a woman with calm eyes, uncuffed hands, and a quote below, "They didn't ask who I was." And that's the problem. People started leaving notes below the mural, small cards, names, stories, apologies, promises. One evening, Elise walked past that mural, coat wrapped tight against the wind. She stopped to look, then smiled faintly and slid a folded note into the corner of the wall. It read, "For the ones they didn't ask, I see you." Then she turned, disappeared into the crowd and let the city carry her forward. No spotlight, no headlines, just presence, just grace. And the echo of something that wouldn't be forgotten.